Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lapre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lapre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Today on episode 41, I'm going to be answering some questions that I've seen on the web in various Facebook groups, and it involves using Teachers Pay Teachers, unannounced observations, and substitute plans. But before I get to that, I received another voicemail, and this one is from Allison Bowers in South Dakota. And she went ahead and answered the questions from teachersneedteachers.com/voices. And so here's what Allison had to say about some of the things that she loves about teaching.
My name is Allison Bowers. I teach high school science in a rural school in South Dakota called Hanson. I've taught 8 through 12 science in the past. This year I'm down to just 9 through 12, so I teach a little bit of everything. One thing that I love about teaching in such a small district like that is that I do get to have my kids for multiple years in a row. So most of them will have me at least their freshman and sophomore year of high school, and then potentially more depending on what electives they take. So I love getting to know them over those many years and watching them grow into such wonderful young adults. One thing that I'm grateful for when it comes to school and teaching is the opportunity to influence students so directly. Since I do teach at such a small school, and I get to interact with my kids for so many years in a row, I do feel like I really get to see the parts where I make a difference. And I'm really grateful for those kids that come back or say to me later in life, like, yes, you pushed us really hard, but we're grateful for it. So I had one of those moments probably a month or so ago, and it just really makes my day when I think about it. Something I look forward to in the new year and the goal for this next semester is I'm trying to divert more of my science classes towards a more NGSS route. So I'm trying to directly align to the standards, teach with three-dimensional practices, and it's been a lot of fun kind of changing the way that I do my instruction. My number one tip for surviving school this time of year is to go over your procedures again. It is worth it to take those few extra days at the beginning of a new semester or even a new quarter, and just go over your expectations and your rules and regulations of how you're going to make your classroom function effectively. I took some time to do that when we got back from Christmas, and it has made a world of difference. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Bye.
Thank you so much, Allison, for leaving that voicemail. I'm sure you've received your sticker already that I sent through snail mail. And one of the reasons why I also wanted to have you guys leave me voicemails is that I get to feature teachers from around the country and get different perspectives. And I love that Allison is from a small rural town and she gets to know all the students and watch them grow. And I loved when she mentioned that she gets to actually see the positive effects of her teaching. Very few of us get that opportunity unless you teach in elementary school and you get to see what they're like maybe in the later grades. But a lot of times, especially if you teach middle school, the students don't necessarily come back and you don't get to see how they turned out unless you run into them at the store. Maybe in high school, you'll see some growth from if you had them for 9th grade and you see them again as seniors. But in general, Allison gets such a wonderful opportunity to see them from when they're very young to a lot older. So thank you, Allison, for sharing that with us. I also like that she mentioned going over your procedures again, and that's actually really important. We assume that because we spent a whole semester with students that they remember our procedures, they remember what the consequences are for certain behaviors, but a lot of them have complete brain drain during that time off, and probably so do we. And so just a quick reminder over the expectations doesn't hurt. And in fact, it can help so that students don't fall back into old habits. So maybe if you had students who were misbehaving earlier in the semester, if you give them a reminder and say, hey, we really struggled with this last semester. Let's start fresh and see if we can do better. That can really go a long way.
I'm AJ Bianco from Podcast PD, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like this show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual host. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. And get ready, because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, I found some questions on the internet that I've seen repeatedly. And so to me, that indicates that a lot of new teachers are thinking the same thing or having some similar issues. So I wanted to go over them because I think that they really also resonate with me as well. So the first question has to do with Teachers Pay Teachers. So they said, I feel bad that I mainly use material from Teachers Pay Teachers. I try to plan with my team, but they don't have the time or it just doesn't work with my classroom needs. I'm overwhelmed trying to get everything done and I'm using TpT as a crutch. Is this a disservice to my students? I do make adjustments when needed. So I want to let this person know that, there's really no way that one teacher has all of the best lessons and ideas in their head. None. Even those people on Teachers Pay Teachers that have been teaching a while and have a huge library of materials, they still don't have all of the best lessons. When I go on Teachers Pay Teachers, I have a few different sellers that I go to for different needs. I haven't found someone who has everything that I need. It's just not possible. So when you're starting out, when you're new, one of the best ways to learn the pedagogy of your subject area is to use other people's lessons. And I've mentioned this in previous podcast episodes where I tell you to go and borrow lessons from your colleagues and use them so that you know what it is that you're supposed to be teaching. So even if you have, say, a scripted curriculum, but your colleagues are, adding or adjusting or tweaking, get those ideas from them. They've already tried it out and they know what works and doesn't work. Now, hopefully, they're sharing it with you and they're loaning it to you, but sometimes you just have to go to the internet, and that includes Teachers Pay Teachers. I mean, a lot of us have been on Pinterest, and those Pinterest lessons a lot of times do lead us to Teachers Pay Teachers or lead us to a blog post that then links to Teachers Pay Teachers, but there is no shame in using those lessons. Now, it can get expensive. I'm not going to lie. Even with the sales, it can get expensive because it adds up depending on how much curriculum you need for your class. So, you might spend maybe $3 to $10 for just a few worksheets, or you might buy an entire unit. Some Teachers Pay Teacher sellers have entire year-long units, which I think is, that's awesome, but those are going to cost you between $100 and $200. Now, when you're asking yourself, is this worth it? What I would normally do is I would get maybe 1 or 2 lessons first to see if I like what that particular seller has, if I like the way that they format their lessons, if I think that they are thorough about how they explain topics. If I have to add a whole bunch of my own stuff to it, if I have to do a lot of extra work, then it's not really worth it. So I want something that's pretty comprehensive and all-inclusive. And then if I don't like it, then I'm not going to spend my money on buying an entire unit. But if after buying 1 to 3 lessons from that seller, I like it, then I might buy something that is bundled or packaged together. Now, another benefit of buying lessons from TpT is that when you try other people's lessons, it gives you ideas on how to structure your own if you choose to create lessons in the future. You can also tweak their lessons to fit your students, just like this particular person does. So I have a lot of my best ideas, not because I necessarily copied someone else, but they inspired me. And I wanted my own twist on that, or I wanted to use a different text. And so teaching with somebody else's lesson is really powerful, especially when you're just starting out. I know that there's some new teachers who are on TpT, creating and selling this stuff. And to me, I'm thinking, you just started out. You still don't really know what's going to work for a wide range of learners. And so I think honestly. I mean, if you want to create lessons, that's fine. I'm not telling you not to, but I think it's really useful in the beginning to just try other people's stuff out and then start to create your own. Also, and this is pretty obvious, but there are enough things that you have to do, and you can't necessarily pass it off to someone else, like returning parent emails or grading assignments. So, lesson planning, if you can get your lesson plans from somebody else, that's a big way to save time and energy. And no, to this person who asked the question, it's not a crutch, and it can actually make you a better teacher in the long run if you're getting lessons from somebody else. So the overall message here from me is that I completely endorse using other people's lessons, whether you get it for free or whether you have to buy it from Teachers Pay Teachers. All right, next question. I just found out that second observations are unannounced. Does anyone want to share their experiences with unannounced observation? Anyone completely bombed one? I'm feeling better about lesson planning now, but I don't always follow the model they want, and my timing can be off. My first formal observation as a teacher wasn't horrible, but I knew when it was happening and was able to plan for it. All right, so observations. This is huge. Every school takes observations with a different level of seriousness. So for some admin, they're a little more lenient and understanding that you're a new teacher, while others can come down very hard on you. And I've heard it just run the gamut, where some people, they just have like the administrator pop in and kind of take notes and kind of observe and then leave and didn't see like the best part of the lesson. Where others, they, stay for the entire lesson. They debrief right after. They want you to, do all this paperwork. So I know that there's no one size fits all for this answer. So I just have some general observations and suggestions. Okay. Now, there will rarely be a surprise observation that you feel went really, really well. I mean, more often than not, you'll second guess yourself and you'll just feel like, oh, it didn't go well. I totally sucked. I totally bombed it. So I really doubt that there's someone out there who's like, yes, they popped in and it was totally awesome, because we always are just like, no, I'm not good enough. It's just kind of the, beginning teacher syndrome. So I could tell you to not be hard on yourself, but you're going to be no matter what. Something that you need to consider is that your administrators, they expect you to have flaws in your teaching because you're new. They don't expect you to be perfect. They do expect you, though, to want to grow. They do expect you to have a growth mindset. So you have to be open to their feedback and not get defensive. And that's actually kind of a hard part, because when you're starting out teaching, you're already doubting yourself. Your ego is a little bit fragile. You're second guessing everything. And then when an administrator has constructive criticism, no matter how they deliver it, it feels like an attack. We just can't help it. We internalize it too much and take it personally. And you have to remember that they also have a responsibility to make sure that you are the teacher that needs to be there in that classroom. Especially if you have a union and there's a contract, and after a certain number of years, they can't let you go. Okay, so administrators have a responsibility to make sure that the best are in the classroom. Sometimes, though, I feel like they go too far. Their expectations are too high, considering that you're just starting out. So you have to feel out what your administrator is like, but at the very least, don't get defensive when they're giving you feedback. You want to, take it and reflect on it and then do better. Another thing with those pop observations is that you can only hide so much. So let them see you as you are. I mean, if you are a hot mess in the classroom on a regular basis, they're going to know. They're going to find out. You can't just all of a sudden make everything work when they're in the classroom. So just proceed like normal. That way, the feedback you do receive will be more relevant. So if your classroom management is not very strong and the kids are kind of out of control, yelling at them at that moment, giving them consequences that they've never heard of at that moment, is not going to be in your favor. You want to run the classroom like you normally do, probably your administrator is going to say something about that. And then you need to take their advice to heart and do something about it. That's their job, is to coach you. You need to take it as if they are coaching you. Okay. So we don't want to try to hide something. We want to be normal, but we want to work hard to get better. Also, please don't ever switch to something you've never tried before when they pop in, unless that's on your agenda and it's clearly stated. So if you're teaching a new procedure or you're teaching like a new type of group work, then, have it on the board that today we're learning how to do stations. But don't all of a sudden try to switch to stations because, oh yeah, I remember my administrator wanted me to do more group work, and now all of a sudden I'm going to pop into stations. Don't do that. It's going to be a train wreck and you're going to end up looking worse, okay? It's very obvious when someone is trying to impress the observer, and it usually ends up failing, okay? So just go as normal, go as planned. If you're not doing what they had suggested that you do before, then just suck it up and own it, and then make a point to work on it so that every time you're teaching, you are taking those suggestions, okay? And then also, when you're working on something that they do suggest, invite them to come in and watch you, and then ask for more feedback. So this way you can control the narrative. So if they're telling you that you need more group work, you need more student interaction, work on it for maybe like a week, and then after you have it down, have them come back so that they can see that you did listen to their feedback and that you are trying to improve, and then you can have them come in when you want them to come in. All right. And it also makes it look like you're more proactive, and it'll make it easier when they do come in unannounced. All right. Last question. So I'm going to shorten this one. And basically the gist of the question is, what are your go-to subplans? Now, subplans, man, good subplans are so important. They are a pain in the butt to create. I'm not going to lie, especially the first time that you create them. There's going to be a pain, but they are a necessary evil. You will be absent at some point this year if you haven't already been, whether it's for a training or because of an illness, and you need to be prepared. Now, a lot of schools require a sub-binder with emergency plans that they keep in the main office. In addition to that, you probably can also email your sub-plans to a colleague or your main office secretary, and they can print those out for you and give them to the sub. But either way, your administrator will appreciate that it's not going to be a free-for-all that day and that you are somehow prepared. Now, on a side note, if you're student teaching this year, I would suggest that you ask your cooperating teacher for what they use for subplans. So it's always a good idea to get ideas from other people, and that way you can sort of craft your own subplans and be ready for that. All right. So first of all, subplans take time, so I suggest that you do it in chunks. Otherwise, it can be kind of stressful and kind of a drag to do it all at once, okay? So you're going to start out with your seating chart, an attendance sheet, a schedule for the day, and your discipline policy. That way, if your sub shows up last minute, which happens more than you would ever know, these will need to be front and center so that they can skim it. These are things that they need to know just to run your classroom. Next, you're also going to want to print out a school map with the emergency routes highlighted. That way, if your school happens to have a fire drill or any kind of drill, they know where to lead the class and they're not lost. Also, you want to add phone numbers to the main office, maybe the nurse, and some helpful colleagues as well if they need help. And if you have paper nurse passes or bathroom passes, you're going to want to include some of those. And also list if you have any adults who may come into the classroom. So maybe one of your students has like a one-on-one aide, or you have a co-teacher. So make sure that you mention that in there so that they're not caught off guard. Then you definitely want to spend some time carefully crafting your classroom procedures. So this includes how to ask permission to go to the bathroom, how often can they go, what do they have to do to get a tissue, or what's your electronic device policy. Students will sometimes lie about this kind of stuff, so you want to make sure that you have it spelled out. And the reason why I say that you want to spend some time on this is because you also want to think about what you trained your students in the classroom. And You don't want to write anything too verbose, but at the same time, you want to be thorough. Now, a suggestion I have for you, if you have a planned absence and you know you're going to be absent on a particular day, then pace your lessons in such a way that students can work independently and with little direction when you're gone. So everything, maybe for 3 or 4 days leading up to that absence is basically preparing for the students to do individual work or work that doesn't need a lot of direct instruction. Let your students know ahead of time that you're going to be gone. Let them know what they'll work on with the sub and make your expectations clear of what they should accomplish. And what I like to do is make sure that I'm going to collect the work the next day to ensure that they actually get something done. And then before you have your first sub, you're probably going to want to have sort of like a coming to Jesus talk about how to behave with a sub. Obviously, your students are going to behave worse with a sub than they are with you, but you still want to set that expectation so that they're not complete animals when you're gone. So for emergency plans, you want to have activities that they can work on at any time. And I understand that this can be really hard, especially, if you have a subject where everything has to be sequential, like math. But think of review activities that students can do to reinforce concepts. I mean, even if it's something that you already covered, it doesn't hurt to have them review it. And they may complain to the sub that they already know it, but then, the expectation is, all right, then that means you can do it perfectly, right? You should get 100% if you already did this and you can't be bothered to review. Now, for all lesson plans, whether they're emergency or planned, keep it simple since there's a good chance that your sub doesn't teach your subject area. You definitely don't want them teaching something the wrong way, so activities that don't require direct instruction are best. And I would suggest that you rethink group work. It's probably not the best time for group work or using electronic devices. It can be really difficult for a sub to control those situations unless you have impeccable classroom management and your class is well trained. So set your sub up for success. Set up that day for success so that it won't be a zoo. They won't have to call in an administrator to calm things down. You want to think of all the possible things that could go wrong, like group work. Kids are just going to goof off the whole time, or arm wrestle or whatever, or electronic devices are all going to be fooling the sub into thinking that they're working, but really they're playing a game. So be realistic and don't have the kids do anything that they would probably not be able to control themselves with, okay? Also, you want to include what to do when students finish early. This happens a lot because some students will just blaze through an assignment just to be done and have time to goof around. I've seen it quite a bit. So your sub needs to be armed with what you expect the students to do in this case. So maybe they're going to do homework for another class. Maybe they're going to take out their silent reading book. Whatever it is, just have a suggestion in there for what the students need to do when they're done. So for your written plans, it's really, really important that you have everything listed with headings and bullet points. So you want like classroom procedures to be in bold and underlined, and then bullet points below that. And let's say that you teach secondary, you're going to want to, have like first period and second period. Now, if first and second period are doing the exact same thing, then put first and second period in bold and underline, and then under that write the subplans or what they're supposed to do. It's also good to warn the substitute of certain students on those plans. That way they know, they might try to sit together, and now the sub can keep an eye on them. Or one student will ask to go to the bathroom and will take off for 30 minutes. So maybe you're going to instruct the sub for that student to say no, or keep them after class if they decide that they're going to go to the bathroom. But organization is really key because that way the sub can just go back and skim those headings to find out what they need to know in that moment. And if you have really lengthy subplans, for example, if you teach elementary and the sub needs to know what to do for the entire day, it does help to also have a table of contents with page numbers so that they can quickly refer back to your policies or anything that they need to know quickly. Now, if one of your colleagues is out and you see a sub in the classroom, please be nice to them. I mean, a lot of you have already substituted, so I'm sure you've been in a school where the kids are acting up and the teachers are ignoring you, and I think that's awful. I have actually seen some teachers being rude or just completely ignoring subs, which I don't understand at all. I mean, they're teachers for the day. You're a teacher. They're a teacher. It doesn't matter if they have their credential. They're there to be a teacher for the day. So why would you treat them as less than? And, we all know it's tough to be a sub, and the students are probably behaving badly. So any kind of moral support, or even just a hello or how did it go today, I think would be really helpful for that sub. And if you happen to walk by a class that has a sub and that sub is just killing it, go in during a break and get their information. You always want to have a list of good subs and their numbers on hand. That way, if you need them last minute, you can maybe call, text, or email them. In fact, I have my favorite sub, and I'll even email my sub plans over to her. And I do text her and say, hey, are you available tomorrow? Or are you available on these dates because I'm going to be gone? And it's so much easier, and you have so much more peace of mind when you have a sub that you already know and they know how your classroom works, because then when they come in, the kids also know who they are, and it almost feels like, not that the teacher is there, but you know what I mean. If they're familiar, they're more likely to behave. So I hope you found these questions and my answers helpful. I would love to hear from you. I would love it if you leave a voicemail over at teachersneedteachers.com/voices. It gives you the instructions on how to do that. Or I also know that you or your friends, a lot of you guys are going into student teaching. And I think that this podcast could really help out your friends who are just starting out with teaching. So if you could please share this podcast episode, I'd really appreciate that. I'm sure your friends would appreciate that so they can get some extra guidance on the side. Have a great week, you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.